And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you been wanting a version of Drupal with improvements to the recipe system, the ability to write hooks as classes, and an icon management API? The new Drupal 11.1 release has all of that and more. It was created on December 16th by Catch of Tag 1 and 3rd and Grove. And we've talked a number of times on this show about the recipe system, particularly because it's at the heart of Drupal CMS. In Drupal 11.1, recipes can define whether or not to use strict comparison for provided configuration, and there are a ton of new config actions. These allow your recipe to place blocks, take user input, enable layout builder for content types, clone configuration entities, and more. It's a huge leap forward, and I think you'll quickly see a number of recipes that require Drupal 11.1 or newer. Hooks have long been a powerful Drupalism that allow for deep customization of how your website functions. These hooks can now be written as classes thanks to the new hook attribute on methods. This will bring many of the object-oriented benefits of modern Drupal to the hook system and should make it easier for developers new to Drupal to understand the code to create these customizations. A new icon management API allows themes and modules to define icon packs with unique identifiers for each included icon. Drupal 11.1 also includes PHP 8.4 support. I haven't been able to find any data on speed improvements compared to PHP 8.3, but there are interesting new features like property hooks, asymmetric visibility, new functions for finding array items, and more. There are plans to use workspaces for content moderation, so the UI for workspaces is now in a separate module. For new site builds, if you want your editors to be able to use workspaces, you'll need to remember to enable this new UI module as well. New installs of Drupal 11.1 will also see improvements to the initial experience. These include defaulting to admin-created user accounts only, not adding the body field by default when creating new content types, and more. Drupal 11.1 also includes a new views entity reference filter, opt-in render caching for forms, and improved browser and CDN caching for JavaScript and CSS, among a host of other improvements. A number of these improvements will also find their way into the upcoming 10.4 release, ensuring, for example, that recipes built to use the new config actions can be used with long-term support versions of Drupal that will be supported until the stable release of Drupal 12 in mid to late 2026. So let's talk about Drupal 11.1.
I have never been so excited about a release of Drupal in history. I think I worked on that issue defaulting users to admin only too. I think I forgot to turn it on for a client, and predictably they ended up with 20 or 30 blocked users a day. And I was like, why is the default in this day and age to still allow? And I think I found an old issue that was ready and just maybe needed a test or something, and updated it. But of course, the thing I'm most excited about are the object-oriented hooks. And yeah, a lot of work went into that.
Yeah, I mean, I put a lot of work into the config action for placing blocks, especially because for the event platform that we've talked about on the show before, I feel like
Yeah.
a more flexible way to be able to place blocks into the default or admin theme is going to be a huge help. And so, from my standpoint, pretty excited to see that one out in the wild now as well.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't realize when I first got my first, like, core issue in, was how long you have to wait to actually see things and start using it, right? So it's not like, first of all, it might get in a month or 2 before the release. Well, you have to wait for the release, but then you have to wait until you're working on a site that can update to that release too. So it's gonna be a little while until we really start to see the benefits of, like, uh, benefits of these, but there's so much in this release. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the counterpoint to that is that because Drupal CMS is going to be based on Drupal 11.1, if you want to try out some of these things, being able to spin up a Drupal CMS site, really in less than a month is going to be something you're going to be able to do to try out some of these new features.
And as a precursor to our actual show, I spoke about Drupal CMS yesterday as a way to preview I had a client asking if there's a marketplace to see features that they can apply, and I was like, "Well, recipes are, the beginning of that, and Drupal CMS has a good way of pulling together a bunch of recommended ones, so we can certainly look at those and pull from, whatever we want." But, uh, yeah, a lot of exciting things, a lot of, things that feel like they're sea change type things. They're there's always been incremental improvements, since we've gone to the minor release format, but this feels like there's some like recipes is here, and it's finally in a state where I think people are going to really start building their own. Very excited.
So for someone who hasn't done development in a few years, what is like how would you use an object-oriented hook? Like what's an example?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? The main benefits I see, other than the fact that we can get rid of procedural hooks, which are really an anachronism, is you can use dependency injection, which means that you can start to uncover a lot of the um, you can start to uncover a lot of the hidden dependencies that you might have on certain modules or services. And so sometimes if you are just calling a service directly, you might have a hidden bug there because that particular service might not be available when you're calling it. But since it was all procedural, it just doesn't get caught as well. I think the bigger
So when you're
practical.
defining a hook, you're able to say, this is what this hook needs
Yes,
to run.
yeah, and then things like the rector and the update bot can better detect if you're using something that's deprecated more easily, and they can update that for future versions. It also
Ah,
makes maintenance easier. But I think honestly, the biggest benefit for most people is going to be just organization, right?
mhm.
Right now, your only real organization options for hooks is all the hooks go in the .module file or like tokens or views.inc, and then that's it. With these classes, you can kind of put each individual piece in its own class if you need to, or group them together. You can also define one method as multiple hooks. So, for example, the cron, you can put the cron hook in a cron hooks file. You can put the help hook in the help hooks file. You can put all the node update hooks together in one file. And if they're the same, like very often you have an insert, the node insert or the node update function have to do the same thing. Well, now you just do one function and just tag them as both hooks. Um, that has the added benefit of I don't know how much this will help, but that has the added benefit of you're only loading this code when it's needed. Whereas previously, .module files were always loaded, right? So if you're calling the hook help to see the help text on a page, it's loading the .module file for all the modules and all the code that's in those. It's only running the hook help, but it's loading everything. Well, now, if it's object oriented, it's only going to load the class that has the hook help in it. And so if you have it by itself, that's it's not huge, but it's 30 lines of code that isn't loading on every single hook invocation that you don't
So
need.
yeah, better organization, more efficiency.
Yeah, yeah, and it, I'm very excited about it just because it's also like it feels weird to mostly be object oriented except for hooks. And there's still a lot of legacy code and core that needs to be managed. And I'm working through some of that. But as far as stuff that's required to be procedural, there's only 3 hooks left that are like absolutely required. That's hook requirements, hook module implements alter, and hook info, which I am on a mission to convert those. And then there's everything in the .install file and preprocess hooks. And once we solve those issues, other than themes, we will no longer need any procedural code in Drupal sites, which will be nice.
It seems like for people learning, it's a big thing for to have consistency because when you're teaching Drupal, it's always like, "Oh, well, this is how things are done, except for these things where there's a special Drupal way. So this seems like it might also make it easier to
Yeah.
teach. Even though there's going to be more files, I suppose, for people to look at, but at least things are done in a consistent way.
Yeah, and for people coming from outside of Drupal, these are technically event listeners, which are like, and Symfony has an as event listener attribute, which is not quite the same thing as hooks, but pretty close. And so it also brings kind of the hook feature closer to what the upstream framework uses, which I think also makes it easier for people coming to Drupal from outside to at least understand what's happening, right? If they see that and you just tell them, "Oh, it's an event listener," like, "Okay, I kinda know what that is," and it
I
just
think I already told people that's what hooks were because it is the kind of the closest thing, but it
yeah,
behaves more like an event listener.
yeah, yeah, they're both observer patterns, so it it works. But anyway, that's enough about Drupal 11.1. Very excited about it. Looking forward to see what people are doing with it. And as always, like people have already been reaching out to me, asking me questions about edge cases. So happy to continue to support that. If people have any questions about converting their site or module or client to object-oriented hooks, I'm available. But anyway, Martin, thank you for uh, another non-module of the week, module of the week. But if folks wanted to connect about suggestions that they have, like I think there's a couple that have come in recently, what's the best way for them to send you suggestions?
We're always happy to talk about candidates for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as Man Clue on all of the Drupal and social platforms.